Joining me now for his perspective on the latest in Canada-China relations is Canada's former ambassador to Beijing, Guy Saint-Jacques. Monsieur Saint-Jacques, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
First of all, I have to ask you, what do you make of this latest measure, this Chinese announcement of heightened inspection of Canadian pork?
Well, I think it's part of the Chinese playbook. Obviously, they want to continue to increase the pressure on Canada, but I must say that I was a bit surprised, taking into account the ongoing African flu that has already decimated maybe 10% of the swine in China. And so as they cannot import pork from the US because of the ongoing trade war with that country, I would have assumed that we would have been spared. But this is very important. If you look at the trade data for the first 3 months of the year, it's almost one quarter of well, it was a $250 million. And that means it's very important. And it probably means also that China has found other sources of pork. I suspect they are going to import more pork from Eastern Europe and Russia.
Okay, but you say they do need pork, but the question is whether they want to ban our pork if they're the ones suffering from the swine flu, the African swine flu.
Well, I think it's obviously they just want to put pressure on us. They know also, they make a possible link with the upcoming elections in Canada, in as much as they know that the Liberals have many ridings in Quebec, and since a good part of the pork that is exported to China comes from Quebec, I think obviously there may be a link there. But again, I was surprised by them taking this kind of action.
Okay, the other question, I guess, and I don't know if you know this, I don't know if any of us knows this, but I mean, if you look at canola, I mean, a multi-billion-dollar boycott of our product, and you're saying how much this can hurt potentially the pork imports. Is there any idea what might come next? Are there any other logical targets? I mean, we know that the Chinese last week warned Canada of continuing suffering if we continue to, as they say, side with the Americans.
Well, as you may know, they have made a list of all ongoing transactions with Canada, and they had asked all the Chinese province to report of what was going on. So that means now that they have a list of potential targets. And the unfortunate thing is that they will want to continue to add pressure on Canada. And we have to be clear with them, even if they were to reduce our exports to zero, there is no way that we can intervene in the extradition process of Mrs. Meng. This will have to run its course. But I think we have to brace ourselves for more measures. And it's probably time, I think, also for Canada to speak more forcefully and to start to take some of its own actions.
What do you make, though? I mean, the opposition in question period, we're making a lot of the fact that we still don't have a permanent ambassador to Beijing after John McCallum left, had to step down in January. It's been since January that we've not had a permanent ambassador. The opposition was making a lot of that. You're familiar with the diplomatic world. Is it significant? Is it a significant handicap for us?
Well, of course, it would be better to have a permanent ambassador in place. But this being said, even if we were to have an ambassador tomorrow in place in Beijing, he or she would not have much better access, because the Chinese have been very blunt about this. They said, we are not going to discuss anything with you unless you promise that you are going to free Mrs. Meng. And from that perspective, the announcements that Ambassador Liu Xiaoye is going to leave Ottawa is going to give us some leverage, in as much as they will have to request agreement for their new ambassador. And I think that we should do a quid pro quo, whereby there would be a promise on their part to accept, to give us agreement for our ambassador, and in exchange, we would give agreement for their new ambassador. But of course, on the other hand, if they have come to the conclusion that Canada is hopeless and they don't appoint a new ambassador themselves, I think this may be a sign that even if we were to send a request for agreement for the new ambassador, that they may want to sit on that.
Okay, well, that brings up the other issue then, and we heard Chrystia Freeland at a parliamentary committee saying, admitting that China is not even agreeing to meet at the foreign minister level or at any senior level. We have, parliamentarians trying to knock on doors in China, but we're not getting any direct contact. What do you make then of last week, the comments by U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, who said that they reiterated their support for Canada in this dispute, and he said that President Trump, might take up the issue at the upcoming G20 summit in Buenos Aires. What do you make of that?
Well, I certainly hope that President Trump will raise this with President Xi when he meets with him at the G20 summit that will take place at the end of June in Osaka. Because let's remember that it's the U.S. that put us in this mess, and it's the only country that can really help us. But will Mr. Trump be generous towards Canada, and in which terms will he raise this? Will he make a link with something else? In fact, it would be much easier if this would be part of the conclusion of a trade agreement between China and the U.S., because that would give some more leverage to Mr. Trump. I think because of Huawei being a flagship company for the Chinese, and because they feel that they are under direct attack by the U.S., I don't think that unless Mr. Trump is extremely forceful, I don't think that the Chinese will agree to free up Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. So that means that, in fact, we have to brace ourselves for more retaliatory measures and more difficulties knowing how long the extradition process of Mrs. Meng can last.
That's the other question then. It's not Buenos Aires, it's in Osaka. At the G20 summit, should Prime Minister Trudeau try to somehow engineer a face-to-face meeting with Premier Xi, or is that just not in the cards?
Well, I gather that a request has been sent to the Chinese to have such a meeting. So far, there's been no reply. I don't think we will get a reply. And unless Mr. Trudeau deliberately tries to get in the way of Xi Jinping, I don't think there will be any discussion. And that's the way that the Chinese proceed. Let's remember that at the last G20, Prime Minister Trudeau had only 2 bilaterals with other leaders. In this case, obviously, Xi Jinping will try to ignore Mr. Trudeau as much as possible.
So, I mean, in the short term, there's no real immediate contact looming, aside maybe from President Trump trying to get some words in for us.
Well, I think also that you can probably expect that what Mr. Trudeau is doing right now as part of the commemoration of the end of the Second World War in Europe is trying to speak with as many leaders as possible who are going also to attend the G20, to impress on them that we need their support, and asking them if they meet with the Chinese president, to impress on him that they should free up the 2 Canadians, that in fact what China is doing is harming the image of China in their own country. And hopefully with this kind of international support, maybe we will see a little bit of movement, but I'm not very hopeful.
Okay, well, Mr. Saint-Jacques, thank you very much. Very interesting as always, and we'll keep in contact. Thanks for speaking with us.
Thank you.